Hello and greetings from UB. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's webinar presentation. My name is Christy Fields, and I manage the Alumni Careers and Lifelong Learning Program at UB. We are so grateful you are able to join us today and hope you and your family are staying well. It is my honor to welcome today's featured presenter, UB alumna Stephanie Argentine. Stephanie is a global human resource executive with experience in healthcare, consumer products, government, and higher education. In early 2015, she founded Solvent Consulting LLC, a management consulting firm focused on helping people and organizations navigate the big, ugly, messy problems and challenges that have them stuck. Most of her work is in the areas of strategy, governance, and organizational alignment, with some select executive coaching engagements. In addition to serving as the executive in residence for the UB School of Management Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness, Stephanie teaches 2 graduate courses at UB, Leadership and Executive Presence, and a seminar course nicknamed The Future of Work. In today's webinar, you will learn how to adapt your management style for a work-from-home team. Some things have to adjust, but maybe not as much as you think. We'll talk about the role of a manager and what has and hasn't changed, as well as tools and techniques you can use. Managers also have the potential to use our current reality to become a better manager and then have new practices carry over to when we begin to operate in our new normal. We will leave some time during today's webinar for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them at any time through your GoToWebinar control panel taskbar. You'll see a question section on that taskbar. Submit those at any time. We will save them for our Q&A at the end of Stephanie's presentation. In addition, we will be recording today's session and we'll send you all a copy within the next 24 hours. Lastly, Stephanie has uploaded a handout into your GoToWebinar taskbar. Feel free to download that at any time as well and have it as a resource and to follow along. With that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Stephanie Argentine.
Hey, thanks, Christy. It's fun to be with you guys. I'm in my dining room and lunch is being prepared in the kitchen next door. So like many of us, you may hear background noise these days. So just to get us started, it's always good to think about, for me to know if there's something in particular that you all are hoping to get out of today's webinar. So Christy mentioned the chat panel. If you guys want to just send anything specific that you were hoping to get out of it, I'm going to have Christy tell me what a few of those things are as they start to come in. So it's always good to be doing something with UB. Christy, have you guys been super busy with webinars lately? Have we been doing more of them?
We have, Stephanie. So we have been doing, we were doing webinars originally on Wednesdays, and now we're doing them Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays.
It's interesting because we're all kind of like more available to do webinars and participate in webinars. So it's kind of a nice silver lining.
It sure is. And I have a couple of responses that are already coming through. So I'm going to go through just a handful so you have an idea. Some of them include how to better engage with staff virtually, strategies to stay connected to your staff when you haven't seen any of them in more than a month, how many people from different locations, country, especially if you're managing across the globe, how to keep them in touch with yourself as a manager, and how to hire staff into a remote environment. So those are a couple that have come through.
Yeah, those are all great, really great questions. And I'll try and make sure that I touch upon some ideas as we go. And I just want to say to everybody on this webinar, I'm just an alum like you guys. So these are just some thought starters for you guys. I'm not pretending to be really anything more of an expert than any of us could be on this. So with that in mind, I'll just take you through some stuff that I was thinking about. And interestingly, this was I was already lined up to do like a keynote sort of presentation on what was talked about as manager of the future before coronavirus. And then when all of this hit, it became this sort of managing right now in the current environment. So the things that I'm going to try and talk about today are really three main topics. One is the role of the manager in general. What is it that we expect managers to do? Because I think that's always good to kind of go back to what the ground base is of that. I'm going to talk about the what that we do as managers. And I'm not good at those, those catchy things that you see on the internet that are, here's the top 5 things you must do or 3 things you shouldn't do. But I made an effort at coming up with 5 C's, as I called them, to make it a little bit easier to think about what those what are of managing. And then the third topic is the how of managing remotely. And that's where we'll see maybe some of the changes, in particular, some of the things that you guys talked about in your what you're hoping to get out of this. So Clayton Christensen has this great quote on management. He died fairly recently, and this quote started coming around and making the circles and rounds again. But it basically talked about management as a really noble profession, and that as managers, we have a chance to help others learn and grow, take responsibility, be recognized for their achievements, and contribute to the success of a team. So that's really what we're doing as managers. And if you think about it that way, those things, the what of that really doesn't change when we move to a remote environment. And so if we keep that in mind, that helps. What I just pulled up in terms of the next slide is the Corporate Leadership Council, which was a division of the Corporate Executive Board. It's now been pulled into Gartner. But in 2005, they did some research that I became familiar with in one of my past HR exec roles, called Managing for High Performance and Retention was the name of the study. And what they did is they looked at management behaviors that drive employee performance, retention, their connection to the organization, and they isolated the ones that had the greatest impact. And the 10 that are listed here, they talked about the manager having 2 main roles, managing work and performance and managing the employee's relationship with the organization. And then within each of those roles, there were 5 key tasks or behaviors, and they're all listed here. I think it's great work to look at. I think you can still find it online. But basically, we want managers to set expectations. If you look at the right side of my slide, summarizing it, set expectations, provide informal feedback, and provide day-to-day coaching. That's 3 things that we're doing: setting expectations, providing feedback, and providing coaching. Essentially, when people get stuck, that kind of coaching. And in the second role, it's really about connections that we're making, connecting employees to culture, connecting employees to their coworkers, and committing to employee development. Those are all in those connection sort of thing. And you guys talked about some of those connections. How do I do that in a remote environment? That was some of the things that you were hoping to get out of today. So I basically took that CLC research, that Gartner research, and I said, okay, let me try and do one of those, the 5 C's type thing. And I reduced it to really 5 things that we're trying to do as managers: communicate, clarify, coach, connect, and then customize. I had a really hard time coming up with customize. It was not as easy as the other 4, but I think it works. So, what we're doing is we're communicating vision and strategy. We're communicating the direction and the goals of our department or function. So those are kind of the big communication things. And we're clarifying what good looks like and the desired outcome. I wrote a blog post on this too that I think UB's gonna publish later. I think Christy will talk about that at the end. But I think one of the things that I say quite frequently is people don't come to work saying, I'm gonna really try to screw things up today. And if they're doing that, I think as managers, we have to first look internally and say, have I clarified and said what good looks like, what the desired outcome is? So if there's issues with performance and lack of alignment there, I think we need to start here with us as managers. In terms of coaching, here's where we're providing recognition, providing feedback, clearing the path of obstacles, and then doing coaching for growth, aspiration, and development. Employees really want to make progress and they crave feedback on their performance. Teresa Amabile out of Harvard wrote a book on this called The Progress Principle. And I think that craving, wanting to make progress and craving that feedback is one of the things that we as managers need to make sure that we're meeting that need for employees. We all know that we need to feel a connection. We want to feel that our work connects to some greater collective purpose. We want to connect employees to each other. We want to connect our employees and our staff and our teams to opportunities. We want to connect them to the culture. You guys talked about this in terms of some of the questions that you had coming in the chat. Particularly powerful, this maybe goes a little bit beyond what we're doing today, but particularly powerful is our role as managers in helping connect our employees and our teams to opportunities and future growth and their own development and career aspirations. That's particularly powerful in terms of something we can do. I think one of the other things that we need to think about is that this isn't a one-size-fits-all type thing. So we do want to customize how we communicate with each of our individual team members, how we clarify, what type of clarification they need, how we coach and connect them. We need to tailor all of this to ways that are adapted to their individual needs and preferences. The two things that I think are really helpful, my go-to favorites here, probably StrengthsFinder 2.0, an assessment, easy little book, $15 I think the book is, and it includes an assessment with it that gives you ideas about what we're each uniquely good at. That can be something that can be a really interesting thing to do as a team exercise, and maybe something that you could do in this virtual environment as a way to both build and maintain that team connection, but also get some insights as a manager into how each of your individual team members is wired so that you can do that customization to their own needs and preferences. The other tool that I tend to refer to here time and again is, I think it actually, now that I look at this slide, I think it's the 1 minute manager meets the monkey, not the 5 minute manager meets the monkey. I can't remember. But in essence, it's in that series of 1 minute manager books. And in essence, one of the themes from that book is that it starts as one of those business fable. And the idea is, why as managers are we always running out of time and our employees are always running out of work? And the idea is that it has to do with how we delegate and what we're doing. And the 5 minute manager meets the monkey has a two-pronged way of tailoring how we delegate. And the two methods in that book are act and then advise. So that's one method of delegating. When we delegate something to a team member, we tell them to act. Go ahead and act on this and then just tell me what you did. And the other one is, I want you to recommend to me what you're going to do, and then we'll talk about it, and then you can act after that. So the two prongs are act and then advise, or recommend and then act. So those are two of the things that I think would help with customizing. I'm going to put up a next slide in terms of some things to think about and maybe put out in the chat. I'm willing to bet that we've had some successes with managing remotely, some things that have gone particularly well, even some things that might be working better with managing remotely than they were in the old way. And if you've got some things that you'd like to share, I'd love to have Christy share some of those with the whole group here. And Christy, if you've got additional sort of things that the people said they wanted to get out of today as they're putting in answers to the successes and what's working better, that'd be fine too.
Excellent. So yes, feel free to go ahead and put your responses in the question box. But Stephanie, yes, something did come through. What they're hoping to get is, what are the best new technologies to leverage when managing remotely? They're using video conferencing right now, but any other suggestions or advice you might have for this, especially when you're managing from a global standpoint. So that is something that just came through as of recent.
That's great. I've got a slide toward the end that's some tools and tactics, including some technology. And while we're there and waiting for some other sort of successes maybe to come in, I hadn't used Slack until probably about 6 weeks before this, and my husband hadn't used the tool that he's using at his workplace is Jabber. He had never used Jabber, so I think some of those channels of how do we do that authentic, regular communication. It's kind of halfway between email and text messaging. Slack, Yammer, Jabber, those types of tools. That's one thing that I think I've found to be really, really effective as a parallel to these video conferencing. Any successes we're seeing?
Yeah, so a few that are coming through, and a lot of people are using video, so we're seeing lots of that these days. Somebody mentioned they host a weekly sharing of wins, whether they're small or big. So as a manager, they really want to take time to recognize those wins. So that's great to see. WebEx Teams is working very well, Zoom Rooms, so we're seeing a lot of that come through.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is I was going to give, I had been asked to present at a different event, not the one that I originally prepared this topic for, but a keynote at a leadership retreat. And the topic was on meetings of all things. And one of the things that I think we're finding with all of us working remotely and being on video conference, I think one of the things that I think we're seeing is working better is how much more effective it is when we're all working this way. And I think that's something as managers that we need to take away whenever post is for this. Because I think if you can think back to times when you've had meetings where some people were virtual, that it wasn't a level playing field. And I think now that we're all virtual, those video conferences and all of those technologies, we just see how much better it is when everybody's doing that equally. And there are some companies that before we entered this realm, when they did videos, it was a behavioral norm and expectation that if anybody was remote and virtual, that everybody was doing it in the video conference, that there weren't 6 or 8 people that were live in person in a conference room and 1 or 2 that were trying to dial in, that if people were going to be remote, everybody was. So I think that, that's maybe a success and something that we've now got some deeper understanding of. So, I'm not really going to do anything with this slide. This was just, I think, probably me playing around with icons and that kind of thing. But I've heard a couple of folks talk about this as, BC before coronavirus and AC after coronavirus. But I do think that, and this is apropos of really nothing, but I have linoleum in my kitchen. And I've got this theory of life that things should be authentic and true and the best of kind of what that thing can be. So I didn't want a linoleum vinyl floor that was pretending to be tile or wood. I wanted it to do something that only linoleum or vinyl could do. So it's some weird abstract pattern. But I think that authentic, what is this remote environment best for? I think that's something that we can take away post this, whatever this next normal is that if we're thinking about, okay, this is the hand we've been dealt, how can we work in the way that this video remote works best, I think is one of the things for us to think about, because what we're doing as managers hasn't changed. But I think there are ways that this remote virtual environment, there's some things we can do better. If you're, I know I've been in this bucket. When we're a manager, there are things that we always intended to do, things that we know we should be doing as managers. I think that this remote environment gives us a chance to reset. We can start doing things that we intended to do. We can try things and do them a little bit differently. I think as managers, that's one of the best opportunities that we've got here, is to say, now that we're remote, what could I do differently that maybe I always wanted to do, but somehow forgot about or got away from? Or what have I always wanted to try? This gives us a chance to do that. Reset, restart, kind of up our game, and then think about what is it that we want to continue doing when we can start being together in real life again. So Christy, I'm just going to pause. Anything else that came through in terms of the chat that you want to add?
Yeah, we did have some other great responses come through, so I'll share a couple of those. Maybe you can touch on this first one here first. Somebody's also realizing that many of their team members are now working more during the lunch hour, so maybe separating, home from work. Any suggestions or advice there?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I've been working from home for 5 years now, and I am not one that's probably would ever be giving a presentation about separating work and home. I've always been somebody that's probably had a much more fluid boundary in both directions, doing family and work stuff from home, or family stuff from work when I need to, working late at night. I've worked in international companies, and so, that time boundary is just different when you've worked internationally as well. I don't know is I've got some recommendations. So the question was to how to respect that boundary better or get people to do that, Christy?
Yeah, I think just respecting those boundaries more, since more people might be working through some of their, lunch hour, or maybe just, staying more connected and not logging off maybe before the night or closing up for the night.
Yeah. I don't know. I bet you some of the folks on the call probably have some recommendations there. I think that I think I've got this on a later slide, but one of the activities and exercises I've done before with my team is a team charter. And it's both about sort of our mission and vision. What is it? Why does our team exist? What is the role that we fill? What are some of our big priorities? And then you can have a section that's about values or norms, but that might be a way to bring the team together and to talk about what some of those norms are, because sometimes those things are as simple as, so let's say we want people to take lunch or shut down and step away at the end of the day because they've gotten sucked into this work from home thing, and they're just learning how to draw those boundaries. If the team talks about that and sets that as a team norm, then people are more likely to be self-accountable for doing that because they've had the conversation and now you've documented on a team charter type document. So I don't think I have an example of that in the slides, but I could share, I could make a blank version of that and try and share that later if that's helpful. But that's, just a team exercise, and team norms might be helpful. I'm gonna, oops, it looks like I changed where my cursor was. Okay, so now it's got the after coronavirus. Okay, here we go. So this is some research that I saw come across fairly recently. So this is the Institute for Corporate Productivity, I4CP is their acronym. And they asked, have asked a couple of times, what percentage of employees were working remotely from home? This was probably a couple weeks ago that they did this research, but look at the huge shift here. So prior to the pandemic, the gray bars show that, the most dominant answer was 74% of people said 1 to 24% of their team was working remotely from home. And now post, the most common is 36% are saying that 75 to 90% of the team are working from home, with another 21% saying 50 to 74%. And another 16% saying 100%. So, just a huge shift in a very short period of time. And so, I think that shift just causes huge challenges for us because we shifted so quickly and so rapidly. And I know one of the things, so, as Christy mentioned, I teach at UB as an adjunct professor. I've also got 4 kids that are all, and an Italian exchange student, that are all doing some method of learning in this different mode. So, one of the things that I think we found is we just shifted so quickly that there are things that we didn't get a chance to design as well as we should. We're having to learn on the fly. My husband's a banker, and they're doing the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, and the bank had to build that instantaneously. So I think, we just need to recognize that we're all working so differently, so quickly, that things just aren't going to be working smoothly. And I'm wondering if you guys are having some challenges or what isn't working really well. Maybe we can get some of those examples coming through in the chat as well.
Excellent. And Stephanie, while some of those are coming through the chat for challenges, I'll share a couple of more successes that have come through just to share with everyone. So some successes, a team comes together for a checkout meeting at the end of the day. It helps set parameters on the day, gives folks permission to step away and not do any work and kind of come together as a team. Also, better for being remote, we are invited into everyone's home. It's brought the opportunity to be more authentic as well and get to know each other on more of a personal level. So that has been nice to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest silver linings here is, the chance to see people in their home environment. It humanizes us as managers. And if we can be generous with kind of what we're seeing and observing as our team members are on those calls, sharing their home environment, that's really interesting too. I did see that within the academic environment, we're also getting as faculty and as fellow students, students for each other, are seeing just how disparate our circumstances are. And that takes a huge amount of vulnerability by the students that maybe are in really tough circumstances to be able to share their environment that way. But that's something that's kind of, it really puts a pretty fine point on how hard some of our students are struggling in the college and academic environment with other life circumstances. That was, I think, an aha maybe for some of us as faculty too. Anything, Christy, in terms of some challenges and what isn't working well?
Yeah, so some challenges that are coming through, continuing to empower a new team to be accountable. Challenges technology sometimes, the bandwidth of a network in some countries. And sometimes we have to turn off the video to reduce the bandwidth. Poor internet connection, so a little bit of a theme there. Keeping staff with weaker skill sets productive work. Different communication styles present challenges. Seems to sometimes waste time emailing back and forth instead of just picking up the phone or logging on for a virtual meeting. Some people are juggling more during the day because their children are home. They have young children from childcare, it looks like. Some are teaching during this time. So just empathy and support from a manager they find is critical. So those are some examples we're seeing, Stephanie.
Yeah, those are all huge. My children are all older. I can't even begin to imagine how hard it would be to have elementary school age kids that need more hands-on guidance with that remote schooling that they're doing. I've kind of joked that my parenting style has always been sort of veered to the Lord of the Flies method. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken with the switch for their remote education is, they're doing the best they can, and hopefully they're being as accountable as they need to be, but I'm not overseeing what they're doing and what they're not doing. And that could be good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not sure. But yeah, that juggling more is definitely a challenge. And I hear you on that, weaker skill sets too. And I think that we got to approach that. There's probably a both and in an answer to that. I would say that right now, if you've got somebody with a weaker skill set that you were thinking, I'm going to be heading into performance improvement mode and potentially separating from this employee, I think now is maybe not the most empathetic of times to be doing that. And I think you're going to have a much harder time both A, building the case for that, and B, feeling in your own conscience and the depth of your pity your stomach that you've done all you could. So I think that that's, that is a tricky thing. And it may be that I think there's a lot of teams that are doing some really cool stuff with start of the day, end of the day, start of the week, end of the week. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? If we go back to those 5 C's and we talk about clarify, what is it that we're trying to get done as a team this week, this day? Each team has a different time horizon over what that clarity might need to be. That might be something where you're getting to that weaker skill set in a somewhat sort of indirect sort of way. That if the team is stepping up and setting clarity on goals for the day, the week, the whatever, then that's a chance for that person to maybe come along more quickly. I've got a daughter that's, I've got a couple of kids that are ballet dancers, all of whom, all my kids have been at one point, but a couple who are still dancing right now. And I take Pilates, and one of my daughters and I were talking about how much more difficult it is, things that we used to do in those classes with the group that raised the bar on our own performance, and how much that has changed in this virtual environment, that it just doesn't feel the same. I think we can flip that around, and I think in this virtual environment, there are some folks, those weaker performers, that if we're engaging as a team and clarifying team goals and objectives on a daily or a weekly time period, whatever's the right time horizon for your team, that does give those weaker team members a chance to see role modeling of what other folks are doing and maybe step up and up their game a little bit. So I think there is a chance to help people that are just in greater need of that coaching and guidance from both the manager and their other team members, that in this virtual environment, maybe there are some silver linings there, but probably not for folks that are really close to being at the edge in terms of their performance. And I think that kind of blends that weaker skill set into that empowering and accountability too. I would agree that bandwidth and turning off video is a good tip for that challenge. I was in another panel presentation last week, and the video, I just didn't have enough bandwidth in the house telling all the kids and everybody else to please get off the Wi-Fi for me for a minute. I did end up switching. I've got another channel on my own Wi-Fi, and I switched from the regular to the 5G channel, and that did seem to help. But turning off video was another tip, absolutely. Let me look. I've got one more slide on from this I4CP research, and these were the top 3 challenges of leading and managing remotely that they found in their research. And this webinar maybe gets to the first one, which is, one of the challenges that people had was a lack of training on best practices to effectively lead virtual teams and remote workers. If we've been managing in an in real life, in-person sort of environment, and just flip the switch so quickly without any guidance or training or development on that, people are struggling for that. So if you're in that bucket, you're not alone. 52% of people said that was one of their top challenges. Lack of experience or skill with the technology, the tools available. There's just, even for those of us that maybe think of ourselves as more tech savvy, just the volume of things that we're dealing with all at once has been a huge learning curve. And then, like you guys said, look at the third one there. Somebody said empowering and motivating employees to stay productive. 45% of respondents said that was one of their top three. And along that same line, difficulty managing projects, tasks, processes. So we're not alone. We're all struggling with those types of things. We were probably struggling with a bunch of those things before too, but moving to remote and virtual has just made it all that much more pronounced and clear. Christy, anything else in terms of challenges that are coming through? I'm going to advance the slide, but
Yeah, so I'll read two more just real quickly here. One challenge somebody has found is the exception that there be immediate response to instant messaging. So a lot of people using Skype or business for Skype. So when I am doing something that requires concentration, they need to avoid the interruptions of instant messaging and email. So how to manage that can be a challenge. So that's another thing that came through that I thought was maybe important to share.
yeah, that is a good one. And I've got a little bit of a tip, I think, on that a little bit later that I'll try and remember and loop back to that. So these were some of the things that were already in place at organizations. Some best and next practices by a relatively, look at the bottom right, those next practices. These were things that were practiced by a relatively small cohort of top performing organizations. So these were not things that the vast majority of us were already doing. Leaders gather virtual teams together for in person. That one, the first one there, 69% of it, not really relevant because none of us are having in-person stuff right now. But virtual meetings that build a virtual team culture was something that those groups were doing. Leaders support and model the use of virtual communication software. That back to my point of if you had a split team, the leaders that were mostly in person in the office were modeling those virtual tools as well. So I think those are really important. And down at 18%, the other thing that I thought was really important was, what are the behavioral norms we're going to do here? What are things like setting a quote out of office, to the point of the question that was just raised, that I'm doing white space focus activity stuff right now, and so I'm not available for instant messaging response. But what are the norms of how you would turn on quote my door's closed right now type of norm? So those might be things that the team could talk about and share some ideas and practices. I think if you had a team sort of ground rules charter building, create it yourself sort of session. So I took those 5 C's that I came up with and I said, okay, now that we're remote, how would you do each of those things differently in this new environment? And this is one of the slides that we put together in the handout. So I think the slides that are in the handout, I think we PDF 4 of them. The title slide, I think, just so you remember where the heck you got this from. The original 5C slide that I showed us a little bit ago in terms of what it is that managers are expected to do in terms of the 5 C's. Here's some of the hows in terms of the remote, and this was slide 3 that is in that PDF handout. But in terms of communication, we're going to have to do a lot more by email, by video, by Zoom or WebEx or Skype calls. We might, as a team or as a leadership group, produce some FAQs. I'm on the board of Horizon, which is an amazing addiction and mental health service nonprofit. And they've been putting out, the leadership team there has been putting out a lot of FAQs for the organization, for managers to cascade down to their teams, that has been really helpful in terms of their communication. A couple of you guys have talked about weekly and daily huddles, either beginning or end of the week or the day. Those things can be really important too. And then one-on-one check-ins. If you weren't doing one-on-one check-ins before, I'm willing to bet if we ask people that have been doing those, find those to be really helpful. And that's one of those places where you need to customize that to the frequency and methodology that works best for you and the person that you're doing a one-on-one with. So the frequency could be different. Some people might want to do a video check-in. Some people might prefer to do a phone one and have the video off and just do a phone call. So I think that those one-on-one check-ins are really a great thing to do. And those might be something that if you hadn't been doing them before and we're in that awkward sort of, how would I start this? I've been managing this team for X period of time. I haven't done one-on-ones before. I really want to be doing them. But now if I tried to do them, people would read all kinds of stuff into it. This environment gives you a chance to kind of just start it now and set that frequency and method of how you would do that, customized for each of your different team members. I think the clarifying, and you'll see in the clarifying column at the bottom, that team charter exercise that I talked about. But you need to clarify the outcomes and the goals and objectives. I think we're all finding in our organizations that what it was that we were doing before, we needed to revisit that. And so the need to clarify what all of that would be. And you're probably going to need to clarify it more frequently than you were before, because it's probably still changing fairly rapidly. Maybe it's calmed down a little bit after a month of this, but that clarification process is probably something that we need to revisit on a periodic basis. For those of you that are managing projects, you may have been managing those before with in-person touch bases and updates. You might benefit, again, something that you maybe wanted to do but didn't do before, that documentation of a schedule or a timeline. What is it that we're getting done by when? Co-creating that as a team greatly helps with that accountability and buy-in as well. Because if they've been part of creating that, then the team is more likely to hold themselves accountable for that. One of the things that you may want to clarify is anything that's changed in terms of decision-making authority. So in the old world, those rules about, if I go back to that 5-minute manager, 1-minute manager meets the monkey, the act and then advise, or recommend and then act, there may have been employees or team members that were predominantly in one of those buckets, and maybe those have changed in terms of the decision-making authority, or maybe because things have shifted so quickly, there's a lot more of checking in before we go ahead and act on something. And that could also help with some of those folks with weaker skill sets if everybody is checking in more frequently. And then the last thing in that list is the team charter exercise, where you would talk as a team about what's our team purpose, what are our values or behavioral norms, things with like taking lunch, or when we're going to stop at the end of the day, or how we're going to be closed office door right now. Those might all show up in those norms and values. What are our priorities as a team, and what are we individually accountable for? That exercise can really be very helpful, and it can also be a grounding that you can use in that weekly or daily team check-in, where you're seeing how things are going. In terms of coaching, we got to make sure that we're given recognition and feedback. Those are really not that different. Matter of fact, I didn't change them at all. But the chance to do that, and I've got a video. I'm not going to show the video, but I'll point you guys to it in a bit, where that recognition and feedback is something that the team was doing. And then troubleshooting obstacles. We're just going to be encountering more and different obstacles than we've encountered before. And so a lot of that coaching, not just manager to direct reports, but team members, peers to each other, is really, really helpful. My husband and his coworkers have they've got two versions of it. They've got a text thread that is just the team peer level, And then they've got another text thread that their manager is in that. And they're doing a lot of troubleshooting obstacles for each other in that text message thread. And to that point that somebody made about we see each other's authentic background working environments, they're sharing goofy pictures of each other and how they're working. And it's that text thread is balancing and toggling back and forth between work and real life stuff in a way that I think they're actually really enjoying. And then as managers, we need to model the behaviors in terms of the coaching and the tools and the technology and the things that we want people to be doing. If we move over to the connect column, I think one of the really cool things that we're seeing is a lot more virtual coffee, water cooler, lunch meetings, happy hours. There are people that are getting together to have lunch together remotely, virtually. Same thing with, I'm hanging out at the water cooler right now. Anybody want to join me on Zoom or Slack, chatting back and forth? Those connections, I just talked about this actually in the coaching and troubleshooting obstacles. The connections that are happening in those Slack channels or text threads, I think are really another way to connect. You could also schedule some reverse mentoring tips and tricks sessions, things that maybe technology, who's used this, how's this going? Those might be things that you could share that also reduce the power distance between the manager and the team as well, and give maybe some more tech savvy, maybe younger folks on the team a chance to lead and mentor others. And then, as I said, we've got to customize the frequency, the time of day. What's the optimal time of day with other people in the house that maybe aren't usually there as part of your work environment? The rhythm of our day has really just changed a lot. I talked about customizing the method of how we connect, whether it's phone or Zoom. Customizing in terms of kids and pets. I was on a department school of management meeting the other day, and you could see some of my school of management coworkers, their kids were wandering into the school of management departments meetings. And it was just neat to see those things happening. And we also might need to customize the equipment that's needed. Some of us may need different headphones. As a team leader and manager, if you've got a little bit of budget to help people get the right headset, the right lighting, the right microphone, those can be really helpful things to do in terms of customizing that. Maybe you give people a little bit of a budget, but allow them the autonomy to say what they need to do with it. So those might be some things to do. I'm going to pause there, Christy. Anything that's come through in chat?
Yeah, Stephanie, one thing that you might be able to elaborate on for a few people, you've mentioned the Slack channel. It is new to some. Can you just share a little bit more on what that technology does?
Yeah, it's a way. So, I would say Slack, Jabber, Yammer, they're all in the same kind. They're essentially in some ways like Facebook instant messaging and direct messages and those types of things, but they've got a blend of topics and ways to have conversation that are both, and this is two words that probably most of us didn't know before we went to this remote environment. Those of us that teach talk about synchronous and asynchronous. And the nice thing about Slack and Jabber and Zoom is that they aren't as formal and one-to-one as email, and the record is kept there, but they aren't as immediate as text message. They're kind of halfway between email and text messaging, and they are both synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous in that there will be some people that are in those channels on a regular basis and responding immediately. But you can also go back in after the fact and you can see the history of chat and back and forth and conversations that other people were having in those channels as well. And I'm probably, there's probably somebody on here that's better than me as I said, I was only just getting familiar with Slack, probably a month or two before we went to this AC environment. And so I'm not as expert with it as other people may be. Anything else, Christy, or you want me to cover? I've got maybe, I think, 2 more slides of a little bit of content and then a Q&A slide.
Perfect. We'll do that. We'll finish your last 2 slides and then we'll go to some Q&A.
Okay, perfect. So, so these are some T's, mostly tactics, things that I came up with. So, trust, I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to assume good intent. As managers, we have to assume that people are doing the best that they can and trying to perform well. And I think if we do that, we avoid this, what I call it's not unique to me, but a scarcity versus abundance mentality. And we can get this done, that positive sort of messaging. I think in terms of that trust piece too, that question that somebody had in terms of, I've got to do some work right now. I can't be available, immediate response. How do we encourage, I've got it here as an away from desk message. So I'm away from my desk right now. Maybe I'm getting myself lunch. Maybe I'm helping a kid with some schoolwork right now. Maybe I'm actually sitting at my desk, but I'm working on something deeply focused. So that might be something that we want to do, because I think those of us that have a good intent mentality might have good assumptions when people are not immediately responding. But I think most of us, as a manager, we might tend to default to they're not working, they're not getting stuff done. So that away from desk message, or I'm focusing on something, might be something to think about. Transparency is probably also something that we should be thinking about. Shared drives and documents are really helpful. If we didn't have those before, how can we do that? Shared goals and objectives, that team charter thing, that's another method of being transparent and also clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Some tools and things to put up here. A lot of these, I think everything except the first one are technology based. But I came across something, and I think it bears reinforcing that if you've got an employee assistance program where you work, that's a tool that's available for managers to share with their teams, because people might be fearful of finances. They might be having problems with kids. They might be, having family members that are having health issues or mental health issues. So referring people to those types of tools is good. Shared drives, we talked about Slack and Yammer. We talked about text threads. The next bucket there, Asana, Basecamp, Microsoft Project, Monday, Smartsheet, Trello, those are all project management tools that might be helpful, but you could also just do a Gantt chart or something in Excel to keep track of projects. Zoom, Teams, WebEx, or Skype, those are all ways to stay connected in that video conferencing. And then I'm going to do a shout out to a startup here in the Western New York area. One of the founders is Western New York based, but the company itself is national and international. Walkabout Collaborative actually builds a full-on office environment that's all virtual. And so you actually check into your office in this, like, I don't know, Sims type environment. And you can go into somebody else's office and meet with them, but it's all virtual. You get kind of a layout and a floor plan of the office, and each person has a meeting room. It's really kind of cool. So if you're thinking about, I'd like to kind of take it up a level, Walkabout Collaborative might be a company to look at their technology. The next thing, if you're wondering how to do a team meeting, this is Simon Sinek. His team has been all virtual, all remote, 100% since the very beginning. They did a sample of their, I think it's a weekly huddle. I wrote it down, but now I can't remember. Yeah, weekly video. They do it as a team. It's 75 minutes long. I think they do it on Mondays, and it's all just for relationships. They do shout outs and high fives to each other. And if you go on YouTube and look for Simon Sinek, How Remote Teams Can Connect Meaningfully, the huddle, you can watch them. They walk through a sample of it in 16 minutes, and you get a really good sense of maybe something that you could do. And I think my friend Mike Cardis was the one that suggested this to me. So if Mike is on this call, just a shout out to Mike, because I thought it was really cool. And I think that's it. So we've got time for Q&A here as somebody starts grinding coffee in the background at my house.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Such great information that you have shared. A couple of questions that have come in, and I might share, another challenge or success that have come in as well. But the first question that I want to ask you that was submitted, somebody, a success, has noted that their teams have adapted quickly, which under normal circumstances, there may have been a little bit more pushback. So this person would like to recognize them in a different way other than just a thank you. Do you have any additional ideas on employee recognition when working remotely?
Oh, that's a really good question. This might be a couple things. This might be a time to go old school, and a handwritten note in the mail might be kind of welcome as we're doing everything technology. That handwritten note and that analog sort of way of doing things, if you've got their address, that might be neat. The other thing that might be neat is, if you've got a team and they're working and they're still getting paid, the other thing that people might appreciate is, is there a cause that you guys would like to take on as a team? And is there something I could do in recognition for you guys that you want to do as a pay it forward sort of thing? That might be a little tricky because it feels like you're not actually recognizing them, but depending on your team, that might be something that they would really value, the chance to do something good as a team, as a way for you to recognize them by helping people that they care about, causes that they care about.
Excellent. And then Stephanie, too, another question that came through, maybe somewhat of a challenge that this person is facing, but how do you monitor worker productivity to ensure that employees are putting in the normal work, whether there's flexibility there in their hours, but just making sure everything does get done. So this is a challenge that someone is facing. And I know you touched on it a little bit in the trust, but any other advice you have?
Yeah, I think that if that were me, I would go back and I would say, do we have clarity about the team goals? Should we, would that team charter exercise help us in terms of clarifying what it is that we're collectively responsible for, and then what are we each individually responsible for? And then that setting timelines and when is that going to be done by? And you can't, in this environment, and probably maybe when we get back to in real life too, maybe it's not the most effective way in terms of that checking in and monitoring. Maybe it's the focusing on the outcomes. I think I had that on one of the other slides as well. It isn't worth going back and finding it. And you guys are going to send out the recording of this, but focusing, if you're clear around what the outcome is and the when, then maybe we need to let go of the how much, how many hours, those types of things. That'd be my inclination. I'm probably not the best person to be giving advice on how to sort of tighten that up to hold people more accountable to hours of productivity. Hey, Chrissy, we've got 1 minute left. Do we have time for one more question, or do you need to kind of sort of wrap things up a little bit?
We'll wrap things up here a little bit, Stephanie. I appreciate everything so much. I know we did have a question come through regarding some of the books that you mentioned. I know you mentioned StrengthsFinder. We'll definitely touch base and we'll get any other resources out to the group. But I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement, Stephanie, and the UB School of Management. We're very thankful for your time, your knowledge, your expertise, all the advice that you shared with us. We're very grateful for that. As a reminder, we have recorded the session. We're going to send you the link. within the next 24 hours. So keep an eye on your email. So when you get that reminder, you can go back in, watch this at your leisure, take out some of those tips, the advice, the resources that Stephanie shared. So keep an eye on that. If you haven't yet downloaded the handout that Stephanie included, the 5 C's, that slide, make sure you do that. We'll go ahead and get that out to you post webinar as well, but a great time to make sure you have that in your hands is to download that before you hang up today. With that said, we want you to save the date for this coming Wednesday, April 22nd. We're going to welcome back 2 UB alums, Paul and Adam Hammer, who are going to share a little bit more on what every investor should know about the current crisis. So tune in. There's information and registration available on our website, on our webinar page, and we'll share that information as well in an upcoming email that you'll find that link that you receive tomorrow with the recording. So again, check that out if you are interested in participating in Wednesday's webinar. With that said, Stephanie, any closing remarks from your end?
I am one of the few Stephanie Argentines on LinkedIn. So if you want to send me a message and I can get you those book titles, go ahead and do that. The other one's a tango instructor in California. That's not me. So thanks very much, Christy. This has been fun. I'm glad I had a chance to do this with you guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We thank everyone who joined us today. We hope you take care, stay well, and enjoy the rest of your day.